Welcome to Digital Media India 2021, WAN-IFRA's 10th annual conference for ideas on digital revenue and technology. I am Magdum Muhammad, Managing Director of WAN-IFRA South Asia. I will be the chairman for this morning session. I welcome the keynote speaker of our conference, Mr. Edward Rosell, Chief Innovation Officer, Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. Welcome, Edward. And I welcome our WAN-IFRA board member, Mr. D.D. Purkayastha, MD and CEO, ABP Private Limited. Today, we have more than 150 participants from all over South Asia and from around the world, and I welcome each one of you and thank you all for your presence today. It is the best of times for digital news publishing business. The pandemic, though, disrupted our legacy business and threatens the structural changes in the way readers and advertisers used us. It has increased the consumption of news in digital. Almost all the publishers have seen uplift in their traffic, website traffic, and our strength as a trusted source of news is increasingly being felt now. At the same time, it has also posed challenges of website traffic not translating into revenue to cover what it is lost in the legacy medium. How to grow a digital news business is a question in the top of mind of all publishers today. In the recent interview to our magazine, Asian News Media Focus, Ms. Lakshmi Chowdhury, founder and CEO of news startup Spliner, said, growth and scale as the top priorities for the year 2021. It could not have been said better than this and reflect the priorities for our industry as a whole. How to make news pay and find a sustainable business model is the biggest challenge for all of us. The conference today and the next 2 days will reflect the interests and the aspirations of each of us. We will hear from the successful practices of news publishers from India and from around the world. Ideas for reader revenue or digital subscription and how it is becoming the mainstay of digital news publishing business will be discussed in detail. We will also present the winners of South Asian Digital Media Awards tomorrow afternoon. We have a well-packed program to satisfy your appetite for digital success. I thank all our speakers for coming forward to share their knowledge and learning with us. WAN-IFRA in the recent years has started this program to reflect the changing needs of the industry. Even during pandemic hit year, we had programs on growing revenue, newsroom transformation, investigative journalism, managing trauma, covering science in newsroom, media laws, and other topics. I invite you all to follow us for interesting webinars, group projects, special reports, and advisory support. Before I conclude, I would like to thank all our sponsors today, Google News Initiative, Chartbeat, Piano, Stevo DX, and PPI. And thank all our supporting publication, G Express, Indian Printer and Publisher, Rain Survey, All About Newspapers, and Press Ideas. The success of this conference depends on the active participation of the delegates. I request you to post your questions in the live Q&A box, and our speakers will answer them. Our events platform offers opportunity to interact and participate in the event. Please make use of them. Also, tweet about the conference and post in your social media pages and use the hashtag DMI2021. I hope you will find the discussion of the conference interesting and take back useful lessons. I wish you a good conference. Hope we'll be in a position to meet you in person for the next edition of this conference. I thank you all. Now I'd like to welcome Mr. D.D. Purkayastha, WAN-IFRA board member and MD and CEO of ABP Private Limited, for his introductory remarks. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Now, this is morning in Calcutta, the city I live in, the eastern part of India. At the background, you can see my city, Victoria Memorial, it is called, in the name of Queen Victoria. That reminds about the colonial days of India. India was the colonial capital of Britain. So the city is behind me. So without much ado, let me start. First of all, a very warm welcome to you all at the Digital Media India 2021 conference. I think it is the 10th year since the conference started in the year 2002. The event has accompanied many changes in the industry. To give you a background, the internet penetration in India was roughly 1.5% then, to close to 40% currently, 40. and we have become the second largest country with internet users in the world, next only to China. More and more Indians own mobile phones connected to the net, aided by their broadband prices crashing down, and today as much as roughly 75% of the internet users in India connect through mobile internet. Interestingly, the number of internet users in India grew by a whopping 23% from 2019 to 20. This brings us to the challenge faced by news publishers in the country. While the revenue for most publishers have been on roller coaster since the late 2000s, the real impact and a downward spiral can be seen since 2018. If this has got anything to do with the increase in internet users is anyone's guess. But there is no denying that our advertisers have found more than one ways to reach to their target audience. And then came COVID. I firmly believe COVID has given this world more than it has taken away from us. Never before we had so many opportunities open up. Those who capture these would be the winners of the future. Others would be left behind. While print is still our clear breadwinner, the future for sure belongs to digital media, and we have to strategize now to ensure our share of revenue now and in the future. In this context, this Digital Media India 2021 conference is the need of the time, and the conference brings insights, ideas, and inspirations from around the world for us to plan our digital future. As Magdum mentioned in his welcome address, this conference focuses on ideas for digital revenue and technology. The 3 days of the conference has a range of topics addressed by digital news media leaders from USA, Europe, Africa, and India. The day one of the conference focuses on revenue from readers or digital subscription, to be precise. Today, leading publishers around the world have made digital subscription the mainstay of their digital business. And New York Times is leading in this venture. These publishers have put their readers' interests first and created products that addressed the changing needs of the readers. While in print, our low copy prices, mind you, India has the lowest cover price of newspapers all over the world. Even Bangladesh, the prices are much more than us. And declining advertising revenues have cost us hard, and we cannot afford to do the same thing again in our digital presence. As we have experienced, advertising revenue in digital is not easy to come. Firstly, because the giants are sitting there, the platforms, and the yields are very low. And I believe the quality and credible content we produce every day and packaged in the way our readers want it will have our readers willing to pay to consume it. I'm certain about it. The day two of the conference brings advertising and alternate revenue success stories. And the day three brings interesting discussion on how to set up data capabilities, use technology to help us pivot to digital and transform our business. I personally look forward to listening to many of them. This is my interest subject. I also take this opportunity to congratulate all the winners of South Asian Digital Media Awards 2020 that will be presented tomorrow afternoon. Today, I am happy to learn that more than 150 news leaders have signed for this conference. The results this conference would derive and the collective knowledge of the leaders participating today augurs well for our industry. WAN-IFRA in the recent years has pivoted to bring knowledge and programs catering to the digital and business needs of its members. Several programs, special reports, and webinars every month enhance our knowledge and the resolve to face the business challenge. I strongly urge you to look at WAN-IFRA website and its communications to take advantage of its services. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you take back interesting lessons and inspirations to chart your detailed journey for the year 2021 and beyond. I too look forward to learn from the ideas and insights from this conference. I wish you all good journey and a happy conference ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pukas. You said it well, and you set a right tone for today's session. Now we'll go forward introducing the keynote speaker for our conference today, Mr. Edward Russell, Chief Innovation Officer, Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal in USA. Edward is responsible for identifying areas of new opportunity with a focus on startups and relations with Silicon Valley companies. He joined Dow Jones in 2013 as head of digital product development, overseeing projects including the redesign of the Wall Street Journal website and apps. Before joining Dow Jones, Edward worked at the Telegraph Media Group in London as executive editor digital. Edward worked earlier at Bloomberg from 1992 to 2004 and played a key part in company's rapid editorial expansion. He has also worked as a bureau chief in Brussels, Paris, and London. Interestingly, increasingly in the Western world, we see that a lot of editors taking over leadership responsibilities, and this is a good sign for our future for our industry. Welcome Edward again and hand over the session to him. And over to Edward for the keynote.
Thank you very much, Magdoum, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I wish it was in person. Maybe you'll invite me back next year, and it will be in person. India holds a special place in my heart. I was born in Mumbai. I have a small collection of Indian art. So India has been a very important part of my life and my parents' life and my sister's life. So what I'm proposed to do today is talk about some of the more significant trends that I'm seeing here in the US that are engulfing the media industry. I'm then going to get specific. I'm going to talk about 5 ways in which the Silicon Valley companies are changing the media landscape, possibly forever. And then I'm going to end up with some takeaways for Indian media. What are some of the ideas that publishers in India should be thinking about as a consequence of some of the changes that are happening and that are beginning to come our way from Silicon Valley? So I'm going to just share my screen and put up some slides. And I'm going to jump straight in. With this idea, which is that what I'm seeing is an increasing number of the very large Silicon Valley companies directly entering the news industry. So obviously the big companies, Google, Facebook, Apple, have had a tangential impact on the media industry for some time. But what is new is that they're launching their own news products. So this year, Google is launching a product called News Showcase, which as far as I know, hasn't yet come to India, but it's probably going to be coming to India very soon. And it hasn't yet launched in the US either, but it has launched in Europe and it has launched in Latin America. And I'll come back to Google News Showcase, but I think you'll find that it's a very significant development for Google. Microsoft is launching something called Enterprise News, which is a way of integrating news into its array of software services, including Microsoft Teams and including Microsoft 365 software. Facebook has launched Facebook News. And again, I think this is now launched in India as well. It launched in the US a couple of years ago, and it launched in the UK this year. But again, a very direct presence for Facebook in the news industry. And Apple at the same time as Facebook launched its own professional news product called Apple News Plus. These are just some of the examples and ways in which Silicon Valley companies have launched directly into news. And I think what's significant is this comment by Bill Gates on the right-hand side of the slide, which is it's easy to overestimate what these companies can achieve in the very short term, but you shouldn't underestimate what they can achieve over, let's say, a period of 5 to 10 years. So the 5 largest technology companies in America, these 4 companies here plus Amazon, now have a combined market value of $7.5 trillion. So when companies of this scale move into the media industry, you need to take note. Now, it does beg the question, why are they doing this? Why are these companies showing a strong interest in news? And I think the reason is to do with engagement. That there's this enormous level of competition now between the large technology companies in America, and they're all increasingly on each other's turf and competing with each other on a number of different levels. And news is one of the ways in which they can get their customers to come back and use their products on a daily basis. And therefore, it's becoming increasingly important to them to have some news capability. Now, this is both a blessing and a curse if you're in the media industry. It's a blessing because if the largest companies in America, the largest companies in the world, are interested in news, it tells you something about the importance of news as an economic currency. It's a curse because obviously, back to the Bill Gates point, these companies could become very significant players in the media industry in the short, medium, and long term. So how is Silicon Valley changing news? And I've distilled this down into 5 key themes. The first one is brevity. So as our colleague was saying in the introductory comments, people are increasingly consuming news on mobile phones. And when we look at the data, and this data is for the US, but I suspect it's the same in India, the average person uses their phone something like 100 times a day, 100 times a day. But each visit on their phone is for a relatively short amount of time, an average of 3 minutes. So when you're thinking about news, you've got this challenge, which is how do you create a great experience in just 3 minutes? How do you give people the sense of being deeply informed in very short bursts of time? So that's challenge number 1, I think, that comes as a result of the innovation in Silicon Valley. Challenge number 2, and I'll go into this in greater detail, is community. What we're seeing is that the value of content is shifting from content to the interaction with content. So increasingly, there's an increasing amount of evidence that people are paying for interaction. How do you interact with news? How do you interact with news makers? And again, we'll revisit that theme as well. Trends number 3 is the exponential growth in audio. And you cannot over exaggerate how important this trend is. And I'll show you some of the data that supports that thesis. But in the back of your minds, you should be thinking, how can people listen to my edition of my publication? And that's going to become a very important theme. Theme number 4 might be a little bit more familiar to you, which is visual. In an era of Instagram, media is becoming increasingly visual, and what are the smart ways in which people are creating visual content? And then the 5th and final theme is personalization. And personalization is one of those ideas that's probably been overpromised and underdelivered over the past 10 to 15 years. But AI technology is making this increasingly, is increasing the quality of personalized content. And companies like Microsoft in particular are pushing very hard on this theme. So let's unpack each of those themes a little bit and delve a little bit deeper. Starting with brevity. So as I was mentioning, a good way to frame this is how should we be serving bite-sized news for mobile? So if the average amount of time that a user visits his or her phone is just 3 minutes, how do we give people a great experience of that news experience in just 3 minutes? Now, a couple of things to note about this. One is, the one thing that we've learned about the internet over the past 25 years is the internet relentlessly drives productivity. So there's this kind of incredible pressure to condense the amount of time we spend doing actions. And why should that be the case? When you think about using your mobile phone, just think about the amount of competition there is for human attention on your phone, from games, from social media, from news, from music, from entertainment. And in effect, the mobile phone is becoming an increasingly competitive space for people's time. And so not surprisingly, the amount of time that people are spending actually reading news per visit is actually diminishing. And according to Pew Research, the amount of time people are spending reading news on the web per visit has diminished by 10% over the past 5 years to just 2.5 minutes. So again, this notion of concision and brevity is incredibly important. When I speak to Snapchat and Facebook, they tell me interesting data about concision. So Snapchat told me that on average, they estimate you've got 2 seconds, just 2 seconds to get a user's attention. So when he or she sees a headline and image, that user will only spend 2 seconds deciding whether they read the story or not. In terms of the amount of time that a reader on Snapchat will spend on the Discover platform, reading an edition on the Discover platform of Snapchat, just 80 seconds. What Facebook News tells me is that the average amount of time that people spend reading in Facebook News is just 1 minute. So what these very sophisticated companies are doing is they're developing their products in a way that you can get the best possible experience in the shortest amount of time. And if you think about something called heuristics are these little mental shortcuts, the up arrows, the down arrows, the emojis, the hashtags. What these devices really are mental shortcuts. They're designed to help you make up your mind about a story very, very quickly, or a social media post. So the takeaway from this slide is concision matters, and being able to, and the new battleground is going to be creating a great news experience, but a great news experience that can be consumed in a relatively short period of time. Let's move on to the next theme, community. So as I was mentioning in the introductory comments, there's been this value shift from just content to community to content plus interaction. And these companies here, Clubhouse, OnlyFans, Patreon, Cameo, Substack, have absolutely exploded during the pandemic. And so it's worth us stepping back and thinking, okay, well, what have these services got in common, and what are they telling us about community, the evolution of community? I believe the Clubhouse is in India, and from what I read, I think it's doing very well in India. But each of these ones is slightly different. So Clubhouse, as you may know, is an audio-only community platform where people can share ideas on specific themes. It's attracting a lot of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley. And Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Vladimir Tenevo, the creator of Robinhood, have all made appearances in recent days on the platform. OnlyFans, which started as quite a down market, almost pornographic service, has rapidly moved up market and is now in the business of comedy and music, and is generating $2 billion a year in revenue. Patreon is more focused on music and entertainment. Cameo, again, is more in the entertainment and sports business, and Substack is a platform for journalists. But what have these platforms all got in common? 3 things. First of all, it's really about the disintermediation of the traditional gatekeepers. That's us, that's the media industry. And it's really about putting stars directly in touch with their audiences. So these are very direct ways in which stars can get feedback from their audiences. That's point number 1. Point number 2, there's an element of the cult about these platforms. So when people are stars on these platforms, they're really rising above the fray of social media, which is a kind of a very flatlined, things like Twitter and Facebook are very flatlined. There isn't much hierarchy. Here, there's a very distinct hierarchy. You've got stars, and they're interacting directly with their fans. And thirdly, and very importantly, the value, the economic value, is in the interaction. So people are paying to have a direct access to their stars. So when you think about this, what does this mean for traditional media? And I think what it means is you've got to be thinking about how you're engaging your audiences more directly. In an era where the comment stream at the end of the articles is, a piece of technology that's maybe 15 to 20 years old, it's a very loud cacophony, it's somewhat chaotic, but what are the more direct ways in which your journalists can interact with their audiences? And what is the innovation you're going to create in that space? Let's move on to the next theme. The next theme, another very profound one, which is the rise of audio. And to some extent, and a good way of framing this is, what does it mean to listen to your publication? So in this case, I've mentioned my publication, the Wall Street Journal. What does it mean to, if you took away all the words, how would you listen to your publication? And I think this is the challenge that ultimately all of us are going to have to confront. But just to step back for a moment, the challenge, the opportunity that's been created is really driven by hardware. So smart speakers are now in 50 million plus US homes, and I'm sure they're very similar proportionate numbers in India as well. More than 50% of new cars that have come on the market now in the US contain either Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. So again, devices to facilitate your audio selection. And these things that I've got stuck in my ears, these AirPods, can you believe it that Apple sold 100 million pairs of AirPods in 2020? This is a business that didn't exist, 5-6 years ago, and is now a business that's worth about $12 billion in revenue every year. So what that means is we're in the world now of ubiquitous audio, whether you're in the home, in your car, out on the street, you're listening to, you can be listening to something. That in turn is having a ripple effect on the content side. And what I've been observing is the intense competition around things like the streaming of news and sport on audio devices like Google Home and Alexa. On the podcasting side, this incredible competition between Spotify, Apple, and Amazon to recruit the top podcasters. You'll see a significant announcement, I think, in coming days and maybe coming weeks from Apple about paywalling podcasts. Again, another evolution in that field. And then, as mentioned, with Clubhouse, which, by the way, didn't exist a year ago. It was created in April of last year. Is now a unicorn. In other words, a company that's worth more than $1 billion. So again, the takeaway from this slide, I think, for you all is, what are you doing to lean into the audio revolution? And if words were taken away from you completely, how would you enable your customers to listen to your journalism? Let's move to the next theme. We really are in a golden age of visuals. And in my mind, I compartmentalize it in 3 categories. The first, and maybe the less noticed one, is an explosion in data-driven graphics. And kudos to one of our main rivals, the New York Times, that's really done an amazing job in this field with stories like COVID, the presidential election, and bringing live data into an environment which really tells a story. And I noticed when they published their data on the most popular stories of 2020, that the top 6 stories out of the top 20 were all based on data graphics. So again, one takeaway from this presentation is, what are you doing around data graphics and what stories lend themselves to data graphics? A second very important theme from 2020 is video shot on mobile phones. And if you think about the Black Lives Matter protest that took place in the summer of last year, it was so many of the stories were driven by these actions of shooting a video, uploading it to the internet, and sharing it on social media. So George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Christian Cooper, all of these stories that were at the heart of the Black Lives Matter protest began with mobile video footage. As a closely related point, when people upload their video, often obviously they're uploading it onto YouTube. YouTube has more viewers under the age of 50 in America than all television channels combined. And that in turn is spawning a secondary market, if you like, for up and coming smaller video startups, companies like House of Highlights and Brute. There is this new generation of mobile video media. So there's data graphics, there's mobile video, and then there's a third very important visual element, which is photo galleries. Now, what you're probably thinking is there's nothing new about photo galleries, and you're absolutely right. But photo galleries are getting an upgrade this year, and you'll see this coming to India, I think, very soon. It's something that Google's pushing very hard, which is something called web stories, which are these very elegant photo galleries on Google-based technology. And again, the data around photos is amazing, but more than 1.5 billion photos are uploaded to Google, to Facebook and Instagram every single day. So with this enormous deluge of photography comes this innovation, which is how you format the photographs for devices like web stories and Instagram stories. So again, the takeaway, I think, from this slide is not that you need to do everything visually, but you need to ask yourself the question, what are the ways that you can make your journalism more visually appealing? Is it data graphics? Is it sort of UGC mobile videos? Is it photo galleries, or some combination of all three? And so on to the fifth and final theme, which is personalization. And really personalization is driven by one thing, which is AI. And one interesting anecdote is that Microsoft got rid of all its human editors and has replaced them with AI technology. So they actually had a very large number of journalists that they employed for MSN. And what they're doing now is they're targeting all their efforts on sourcing news from professional sources like your own, but using the AI technology to direct the right story to the right user, the right context, whether it's Office 365 or Teams or other sort of platforms that they have. And so what am I observing across the field with AI that's really smart? I mean, first of all, we're seeing an explosion in hyperlocal news apps in the US, Citizen, Nextdoor, Newsbreak. And these apps, these three apps, among the top 10 most used news apps across all of America, including social media. And so hyperlocal news is making a bit of a comeback, but it's making a bit of a comeback from apps that have embraced geolocation software. And so what these apps all do is they see where you're based and they'll serve you news that's in your street and in your neighborhood. And they all have slightly different strategies for delivering that, but these apps are absolutely booming. So if hyperlocal news driven by geolocation software isn't a big thing in India today, I'm going to bet that it will be when we're having this conversation next year or the year after. Another smart use of AI is more basic, which is other stories on the same topic. You've read this story, and what are the other stories on the same topic? Or other stories based on your previous reading consumption, or what are people on the platform reading? These are all, but what these things all have in common is they're all signals. They're all signals. So again, I think the takeaway from this slide is, if you were going to personalize your news experiences, what are the signals that you want to program to give your reader a better news experience? So I've run through 5 trends, and now I'm going to kind of come back to these 5 trends before we kind of open up for questions with a provocation tool, which is, what does this mean for your business? What do these trends mean for your business? So let's summarize it this way. Let's start by saying brevity. How well optimized is your news service for a 3-minute read on mobile? So if your life depended on giving people a great news experience in just 3 minutes, what would you do to create that great news experience? Takeaway number 1. Takeaway number 2, in a world where interactions, people are increasingly paying for not just the content, but the interactions. What are the interactions that you want your readers to have with your stories that go beyond just the tired comment thread? How are you going to create a tighter connection between your readers and your journalists, knowing that people want increasingly craving for that very direct relationship between stars and audiences? Provocation number 3. What would happen if all of a sudden your written words disappeared. And the only way that people could access your publications was by listening to it through their AirPods. How would you create that experience, and how good could you make it? Provocation number 4. I'm sure that a lot of your journalism is visual, but what else could you be doing to make your journalism really compelling visually, really distinctive visually? You don't have to do it all, right? You don't be having to do, you know, the videos, the graphics, the web stories, the picture galleries. But what is the right device for your audience to make it more visual? And then the final provocation, the one that a lot of people shy away from, is this personalization. They shy away from it because as people in the media industry, we typically are not always as confident as we might be about technology. But I think a better way of framing the question is, what are the signals that you should be using to tailor your news? Is it geolocation software? Is it playing back to people other stories on a similar theme? Or is it playing back to people what other people who are like your reader are reading as well? So I think these are the 5 themes that you should probably be thinking about based on the trends that I'm seeing coming out of Silicon Valley today. So I'm going to stop there, and I think we're going to shift to questions. So I'll stop sharing my slides, and Magdum, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Edward. It was a well said presentation, and I said that 5 themes that we should follow. We'll have maybe 1 or 2 questions. We have like maybe 2-3 minutes before we move on to the next one. I just wanted to ask you. In fact, I feel that news media industry is always like, when we are trying to follow whatever innovation trends that are created by the Silicon Valley companies. Like, can we do that and then they follow us? Like, do you see a scope for that? So what is your thoughts on this?
So I think I think some of these trends are very important. The ones that are coming out of Silicon Valley, and the 5 in particular that I've highlighted. But I think increasingly it also follows the other way around. So I think that a lot of the people in the media sector in the US are increasingly interested, for example, by some of the innovation that's coming out of China and companies like Tencent. And so I think that there's a kind of a 2-way flow of influence really between Asia and the US, which is something that's relatively new, maybe over the past sort of 5 to 6 years. And so those influences are sort of are cutting both ways. Having said that, I think specifically for news, the companies to really watch out for, Google, Facebook, and Apple. And again, it's back to that point, that Bill Gates quote. It's not what they achieve over 1 or 2 years. It's really what these companies may achieve over a period of 5 to 10 years if they keep going in that direction. And I think a question for everybody in this audience is, how do you compete in that environment, and how do you ensure that those platforms are helping your service and not crushing your service?
I have a question for Edward.
Sure.
My question is, in your view, who will be the winner in the next 10 years? Is it the Gannett model, like multiple regional, deep local, language, local news providers, expand it further? Suppose Gannett becomes global. Gannett has maybe South Australia, they have a site, or maybe in north of England they have a site, or a big ones like Washington Post or New York Times. They're big global players. Who do you think, whom the future lies?
Well, I think that the local newspapers are going to really struggle. It's going to be very hard because it's very hard for them to compete against some of these apps, which you may not be as familiar with in India, because I think they're very US-centric, but like Citizen, Newsbreak, which are very adept at using geolocation software to serve you stories literally in your street, in your neighborhood. And I don't see a way for local newspapers to be able to compete with that. So I think the Gannett model is very troubled. I'm more optimistic about publications like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times for one very simple reason, which is that they have journalism that's both distinctive and differentiated. And I think, again, for today's audience, it's worth asking that question. In what way is your journalism truly distinctive and differentiated? Because it's only if your journalism is distinctive and differentiated that you can persuade people to pay. And given that a lot of the theme of Digital Media India this year is around pay models and monetization, I think what we're seeing in the US is that subscriptions are winning. The subscription model is winning. And this may be something that is less the case in India at the moment, but I think it's likely to be the case increasingly in the future, that if you can build a strong subscription model, then it's very scalable. If your business model is just based on advertising, it's just a lot harder. And the only way that you can build a strong subscription model if you have journalism that's truly distinctive and differentiated.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's the time we have for the keynote session today. Thank you, Edward, for joining us from US. And I'm sure you spent late night there, and thank you for joining. Wish you a good night, and then we hope to see you sometime next year. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Magdoum, and I hope you'll invite me back and we can do it in person next year.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Pukesa. So we'll close it and we'll go back to the next session. I request all the participants, please go back on a timeline, join next session.
Please move to your next session.